Migwe chapaji, kwe maji tayan ni we Ojibwe mbungi, we weni sana da winda munugug awian, wagosh, indigu, minawa, migizi and do dame, wa sawadi ushkonigan, wenja bayan, gazaga squaji meka gajin akadeg. Namanji dogish binisro tagwa no Ojibwe moyan, ganabachin dajagan ashim. English? Okay, I'll use a little English. They did ask me to share with you for a while tonight. They didn't say anything at all about using a foreign language like English. I'm also kind of enjoying what Ojibwe is doing to the talk-to-text stuff. So I was tempted to keep going. I'm really excited to be here. I am so appreciative of the work that you are doing to steward a bright future for the most sacred human beings amongst us, our children. It is important and noble work in a trying time for our country on so many different levels. And as we think about the work, I'm going to share a couple of stories just to give some perspective. I was pretty excited about the 80s theme, by the way, for this conference. So the Prince song, Baby I'm a Star, I only came onto a stage with it one time before, and it was for a high school talent show. And I had convinced myself that I'd make a really great Prince, and had a couple friends, for Wendy and Lisa. And I also had convinced myself that I would be able to come onto the stage by jumping over Wendy and then wailing on my guitar, except she was a whole head taller than me. I caught her right on the back of the head. We all went sprawling, and the whole school had a great laugh at my expense. But now I've totally redeemed myself, and that's the end of my TED Talk. Have a great night. As we think about the work, there are so many important things that are going on in our country and in our society. This is a picture of one of my sons and one of my granddaughters. We actually have a very large family. I have 9 children, 6 of my own making, and 3 foster kids. And we now have 4 grandkids and another one on the way soon. It's never dull. I assume everybody here likes kids. Give me a call, always looking for sitters. But we have a custom in our family that when a new baby is coming into the world, that we actually take the afterbirth and we go out into the woods and we bury it with an offering by a maple tree. And the maple trees are considered the tree of life. And of course, you can actually get food out of a tree, so it's a practical statement, but it's a spiritual one too. And we have every year of my entire life gone out into the maple forest in the spring, and we make offerings at the trees of life, and we harvest the sap and cook it down and turn it into syrup and sugar, which, by the way, does the opposite of what processed sugars do. It actually inhibits the development of type 2 diabetes. And this is something that my mom did in her family throughout her entire life, and her mom, and so forth through the generations. So when we go out there with my family, sometimes we have 5 generations in the same family out there doing this activity. And I watch my kids making offerings at the trees where their placentas are buried. And there's sometimes, as I mentioned, 5 generations in the family. And I feel so connected across the generations, but to the woods, to our place, and to our cultural practice. It is so difficult when we look at the long history of colonization and forced assimilation, the way that education was introduced to Native people as an effort to take our babies away and send them to institutions where they receive so little nurture and so much harsh discipline. Schools that kept cemeteries for kids, if you could imagine. And so it does a lot of things. I mean, among them, it's more than a sidebar to note that sometimes the emotional trust bank account with some of the parents, community members, families that you are trying to serve, that emotional trust bank account, it might start with a negative balance. And you haven't even opened your mouth yet or done anything wrong. So as we seek to build relationship and community and get things done, it's important that we understand other people's history, culture, and what might be required to make some deposits into the emotional trust bank account so that we can actually collect some dividends from that. And also to make sure we're not triggering people or adding harm. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. We have a word in the Ojibwe language, Waadookodaading, and Waadookodaading means both my great-grandparent and also my great-grandchild. And that spans 7 generations. In our way, we think 7 generations ago, our people were having a hard time dealing with treaties and all of these kind of oppressive policies. And they were thinking, what are we going to need 7 generations from now? And they thought we'd need some land, we'd need some clean water, we'd need community, family, we'd need each other, our language and our culture. And they did everything they could to make sure that we would have those things. Against all odds, in spite of 500 pretty rough years, indeed we do. When I stand here today thinking about what will our future generations need 7 generations from now, when nobody knows my name no matter how many books I write, truly, I think they will need the very same things. And so I've devoted my life to our language, our culture, our families, and our communities. And I believe that these things are at the heart of healing. It's really exciting for me just kind of getting to know some of the people in the room tonight and thinking about all of the work that is before you. One of my daughters, she's all grown up and finished college. It is her vision to create an Indigenous culture-based birthing center where Native doulas can immerse people in our cultural practices as well as healthy birthing and young children. It has been so hard to have our practices validated in modern medical and educational systems. We are starting to shift that, but it's an emerging effort rather than a well-seasoned practice. And I do believe that organizations like this one have the potential to help us advance that critical work. I wear many hats, and among them I sit on the school board for Waadookodaading Ojibwe Language Institute. It's the world's first Ojibwe language medium school. And they operated with this understanding and belief that I shared about Waadookodaading, our 7 generations. And they said learning must start at the very beginning. So instead of starting with a great high school, they started with a great daycare and started building an early childhood program. They said we don't matriculate children, we matriculate families. And we need to integrate the role of parents and children into the educational experience. It's so awesome. I remember going to the 4-year-old program to do assessments some years ago before I was on the school board there, and I was blown away. They had a little 4-year-old kid saying, "Buju abenujito, gani nejiwe bakagwajing nongam." And one of the other kids puts her hand up and says, "Anizagate hakadebwe." And this little 4-year-old kid had a felt board behind him and puts a symbol up for the sun peeking out behind the clouds. "Awegonen geabi, no denena, ha mashkawani mud." He puts another one up for a strong wind. And I was watching these kids interacting with each other. And I was thinking, these are just like itty bitty kids. I can't even get mine to sit still for supper. And they were working in what you would consider really a well-refined curricular practice. It was pretty incredible. Even like classroom management, relationship building, like it was a clinic and all that stuff. And the kids were operating in a language that most of their parents did not speak at home. It wasn't like they had 20 years in a program to get to that level. Granted, they're about 7 months in, it's a good time to do assessments. Kids aren't too squirrely for start of summer and not so green that they're not socialized to the process. But there was still some magic going on. There were so many other things. And I was really heartened to see within this particular experiment a deep understanding that learning should not be segregated so much by age, that there's a true value to having the 1-year-old kids with the 3-year-old kids, with the 5-year-olds and the 7-year-olds, and that we learn across generations at multiple levels all at the same time. And so they do things like take the whole school and all of their families, and people got all their babies in tow, and go harvest wild rice. I'm not sure if you're familiar with wild rice. It's indigenous throughout the Great Lakes area, so it's an aquatic grass. And they have somebody out there with a push pole in a canoe, and somebody else with 2 sticks to bend the stalks over and knock the seeds into the canoe. By the way, I was out at White Earth, and they opened the lake in the morning at Lower Rice Lake, and by noon, 200 people had knocked 50,000 pounds of rice. So it is a major business. That tribe alone buys 280,000 pounds of green rice from tribal harvesters. It's not just cool culture. It's a modern business too. And they'll take the whole school out there, and they'll ask questions. So they might ask the older kids, how much rice can you fit in a canoe? And the kids are like, rectangle, triangle, another triangle. Fill the canoe full of water, pour it in these cylinders, double check your measurements. And the 2-year-old kid's watching that going, cool. They're making offerings, and they're harvesting the rice, and they have an integrated curricular approach, so they're learning about health and nutrition. The music lessons while they are parching the rice and sitting around by the fire and then jigging it. And that's when the little kids have to get into this pit and kind of dance on the rice and separate the hulls. And all the kids bring it home. And there are lots of applications for the older kids as well as the younger ones. It's a pretty cool effort where culture's at the center. We're trying to do something that the Hawaiians did a number of years ago with great success. I don't know how many of you followed their story, but a little over 30 years ago, the Hawaiian language was illegal for use in public schools. Today, it's one of the official languages for the whole state of Hawaii. I think the official language declaration was more policy following practice rather than the other way around, but I'm glad to see it happen. When they started, there were only 1,000 speakers of Hawaiian left on planet Earth, half of whom lived in one isolated community called Niihau, where everybody spoke, and the other half were elders over 70. Not looking too great. Today, there are 24,000 speakers of Hawaiian. 3,000 have learned it as their first language in the home, so they tripled the population of first speakers, babies. And they multiplied 24-fold the entire population of speakers. You can actually go to school in Hawaiian. There's daycare, there's early childhood, K-12, and even get a college degree with Hawaiian as the medium of instruction. Didn't happen by accident. But some of the really interesting applications are the cultural ones. A lot of times people think things like, languages. It's like a pretty bird singing in the forest, and I guess it would be nice to hear all the pretty birds. But isn't it more important to learn English and Spanish? But it's not just about the pretty birds. It's much, much more than that. They have a practice. It's deeply embedded throughout Polynesian traditions, not just in Hawaii, but when they start school every day, and this is both at the daycare, the early childhood, and then the K-12 systems, the whole staff's outside waiting. Of course, it's Hawaii and it's warm there. And then here come the parents bringing their kids, and straggling parents, because humans, and buses, And then when the kids are there, they line up and they sing in the Polynesian tradition, asking for permission to come into the school. When the staff feels they're sincere, they sing back. And then every kid gets a hug from everybody who works there every single day. Aloha, mahalo nui loa. Now, in a mainstream educational environment, we would be saying something like, are you serious? 45 minutes on cultural enrichment every day? The kids are awake in the morning. Make them do math. Until you realize that their flagship Hawaiian medium school, Nawahi, has a 100% graduation rate. I don't just mean that every kid in high school finishes high school. I mean all of the kids in the early childhood program go all the way through. Now, if somebody else has data like that, they can give all the lectures. But until then, if somebody is figuring something out, maybe we should pay more attention to that. And one of the takeaways is that when we intentionally build and enhance the positive identity development of the little children before us, it pays dividends at everything else in life. And when we teach the kids to worship the other, you get the exact opposite. Beauty comes in every single color. Blondes comprise 2% of the world's population, but a much higher percentage of the world's beauty icons. White folk have done some amazing things, but they didn't do all the amazing things. And speaking to the contributions we have all made and the beauty that we all bring is so critical. Often, the ideas, the values, the things that our children will want to emulate, they are deeply embedded at the earliest age. So one of the things this does is it recenters the positive identity development of the kids who are actually there and the culture that they actually come from. There's much more to what and how they do what they do. There's an ancient Hawaiian custom where when a baby's born, it takes about a week or so for the stub of the umbilical cord to fall off. And so the ancient custom was to go out to the lava beds and carve a divot and put the belly button there and put a rock on top of it. And then they'd remember their spots. And when the next baby was born, they'd go out and they'd put the next one right next to it and the next one. When a girl grew up and became a mother, she'd go out to her own divot and carve a circle around it, like you see in this picture. And then her babies would go there. It's pretty amazing when you go out to the petroglyphs and see acres and acres of divots and circles. Bonding people to the Aina, Mother Earth, to their matrilineal line, to their family, their custom, their culture. So when they say we're doing language revitalization, it's not just about the bird in the forest, it's about strong maoli, which is spiritual fire. And it provides guidance for everything that they do. You ever do one of those mission and values statements exercises within a big organization? I have. And most of the time, I just wish they'd go pull something off the internet and just leave me alone because, right? Because by the time every union and different group, they all check down, it says we believe in education. I'm like, see, could have got it from the internet, left me alone. But once in a while, I've been part of one that was really deep and meaningful, where we really looked at like, who are we? Who do we really want to be? How can we structure this to allocate our time in alignment with our values and hold one another accountable to that? If you get a chance to be in that room, it's pretty cool. And they did that in the Hawaiian custom. Value number 1, aloha, hello, goodbye, and I love you. Value number 2, ohana, family. And so they'll also do things like say we don't just matriculate a child into our system, we matriculate a family. And so they'll have the parents meet and pick medicines, which they weave into a giant lei that goes over the door to the school or the daycare center. And then they have this really powerful exchange of promises where the families have to say, we are entrusting to you our most sacred human being, our daughter. And we are asking you to accept her into your ohana, to love her, to cherish her, to respect her, and look out for her well-being as you would your very own. And the school officials have to answer back, we are humbled and honored that you have thought us worthy to receive your most sacred human being. We will accept her into our ohana. We will love her and cherish her and respect her and look out for her as we would our very own. And I guess you could say it's performative, but I have to say, it's not. It's pretty beautiful. And it gets in front of parents warehousing kids at an institution so they can take off and go to work, and people at the institution resenting the parents for their lack of involvement in whatever's going on, and does a lot. Even when they do have, which is pretty uncommon, a disciplinary issue, it's a restorative justice practice, and they meet under the lei that everybody else assembled, and they lomi, you probably heard lomi massage, work the bad stuff out, and they restore relationship. There's a lot we can learn from these cultural practices. This is a picture of one of my sons. His name's Evan. Oh man, when that pandemic hit, trying to do everything we do on a Zoom screen, whoo. This kid, he was not having it. I have to admit, he's very clever. So he changed his screen name to reconnecting, ... Turn off his camera, and anything but whatever the educator wanted him to do. I had to say, you know, my boy, if you spend as much effort at the work as you did at the work avoidance, just think where we'd be. And he said, but Dad, even the gym teacher wants me to quit running around outside, come inside, do a jumping jack in front of the computer. Like, if she just left me alone, I'd be getting way more exercise. And it was kind of hard to argue with that one. But I did say, you still have to learn. And he said, well, we didn't always have Zoom, and we didn't always have schools. How about something else? It was kind of hard to argue with that. So I said, I tell you what, I'm going to put you in charge here. I'm going to be your supporter. What do you want to learn about it, and how do you want to learn it? He said, can it be outside? I said, of course, there's lots to learn outside. He goes, okay, birds. Birds, perfect. So I got books on like bird taxonomy, field guide to the birds. He goes, no, you need to get me bird seed. Okay, so I got some bird seed. So the first experiment was to put on a hat with a brim and put bird seed around that, put it in his hands and put him out like that and wait for the birds. He's a very stubborn kid, so he's out there for like well over an hour. His hands are getting shaky. And I'm like just itching to give him an I told you so lecture, but nothing happened. Day 2, same thing. Day 3, I was just about to pull the plug, and on the 4th day, some birds landed on the edge of his hat, ate some bird seed, and took off. And I thought, no way. And then he kept at it. He got to the point where he could go outside like this, even without the bird seed, and birds would go like Dr. Doolittle or something. And he started flipping through the books and whatnot, and I thought, well, you know, it's time for an assessment. So what are you learning about these birds? He said, Dad, they're all so different. Do you see that one over there? It looks a lot like a chickadee, but it has these red marks on his belly. They call it a red poll, and the red polls actually act a little bit different than the chickadees. And do you see that one over there? That's a Bohemian waxwing. It's a little different than the cedar waxwings, and you can tell because they have these color striations right here. And that one's a blue jay. Everybody knows what a blue jay is. They're kind of loud and obnoxious, but they're actually more standoffish from human beings than some of these smaller birds. Well, except for that one. His name's Jerry. To this day, I think that kid knows way more about birds than I do. And it was a reminder that just because I'm the dad didn't mean that I knew more than my kid about how my kid needed to learn. Just because I was trained as an educator didn't mean that I knew more about the educational enterprise. That, yes, I have to lead as a dad and I had to lead as an educator, but we have to lead while listening. And leaders who don't listen are soon surrounded by people who have nothing to say. So, of course, it's at the heart of the work that everyone in this room is doing. How do we lead and listen at the same time? To be adaptive. All right. I've been thinking about our family practice, how this could be integrated and even scaled up and amplified within a system. And we've been making efforts at that in many different ways. This is some of our Jedi Council, elders from the Mille Lacs Reservation. They're all great fluent speakers of our tribal language. And they did a language survey in that particular community. There's 6,000 tribal members there, and they had identified only 25 remaining fluent first speakers of the language. They're all over 70. Not looking great. And this is a tribe that had been very successful with gaming and other things. And they said, we want to make some meaningful investments in our language and culture. And they asked me to come to this meeting, even though I'm from the next res over, because I've been doing this kind of work for a long time. And I said, well, how much money would you like to invest? And they said, about $14 million. So after nearly spitting my teeth out, I said, look, you're not going to be able to send these elders back to school, get them educator licenses, and start a new school with them or something like that. We're going to have to do some other things. And how about this? Let's develop some language learning tools like Rosetta Stone. Let's develop some new books for kids. Let's put one of these elders in every classroom in this community. And they looked at me and they said, well, let's do all of it. And there's more to the story about the mechanics for how we did this, but we even convinced our State Historical Society Press to publish monolingual books in an Indigenous language that nobody on their staff could read. That was pretty cool. And Rosetta Stone itself was a major undertaking. The first year has an educator guide that's 500 pages long. The second year has another 500-page educator guide. There are many children in the system as actors and parts of all of the language learning tools. Makes use of artificial intelligence. And again, there's more to the story that I'll probably just skip so that we can move into some other things. But at the same time, we had to teach elders how to do work through Zoom, which basically meant sending a grandchild and a computer to everybody's home. I remember one of these elders, Carol, she's one of the lols, little old ladies in the middle of the pile here. I called her up and I said, hey, it's sin, gedano kime nongom. Oh, tagijin giwanenda, najangi busy kan babiza kawagana tage vigamigung indija. I said, Carol, it's time for our work session. Oh, I forgot. I already put my coat on. I'm going to the casino. I said, casino, there's a pandemic. You're supposed to stay home and be safe. She goes, well, the language is more important. Let's work. So she takes her coat off, starts working. We work for about 3 hours. And she goes, well, I'm going to the casino now. My niece has been waiting in the car the whole time. But they were super dedicated. And it was incredible. You know, the pandemic was no joke for us. 6 of those 25 fluent speakers passed away. In that community, that's 20% of their fluent speakers. And Joe Naquanabe, who's on the left, he's kind of got the buzz cut as ceremonial drum chief. He lost both a brother and a sister. So that was tough stuff. When we finally came out of the pandemic and we're publishing, and releasing the new books and Rosetta Stone and all these things, we asked him to speak, and he kind of floored me. And he said, You know, we've been through a lot. We've been through a lot the past few years. We've been through a lot the past few 100 years. But I have to say that seeing all of these young people coming around, seeing what we've been able to build, knowing that our elders will be teaching our babies our language for hundreds of years to come, I have to say that this has been the happiest time of my life. And it was a reminder, our elders don't want to take things with them when they go. They want to give it to our babies. Language revitalization is healing for our babies, but it is healing for our elders in equal measure. And it's healing for us. Sometimes we get exhausted by the daily grind of all the work. Whack-a-mole on emails and constant barrage of expectations ever higher, squeezing more of our time. I hope you do get to recharge your batteries at the conference, but I hope you can also see how healing your efforts are to build up parents as teachers, to build systems and communities informed by high-quality research and our best professional understandings, that is not extractive of the communities we serve, but is truly in service to them, informed by them, and led by our stakeholders. A lot of us are tippy-toeing around on eggshells. That's with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. That's with regard to how do we shoulder this lift. I think really in Western traditions, it's the religious ones, the political ones, social and cultural ones, there's a lot of messaging about judgment, right? There's a right way and a wrong way. You're going to hell or you're being saved. It's deeply embedded. So even having a conversation about something like race, some people are terrified of exposing an ignorance or offending someone. And it has them leaning out for safety. And for a lot of people of color who cannot avoid all of these things, we're desperate for everyone else to get brave enough to do something about the fact that we just don't get to live as long. And so there's work for all of us in mixed company to do. We have different reasons why we lean out. For some, we're just exhausted trying to explain it again. For some, we're so scared. But what our babies need is for us to lean in. So one of the first things that I like to share, and this is just it's an Ojibwe cultural frame that says you are a complete, fully realized human being. You are a soul who has a body. We'll even say things like, it's not like we're humans looking for a spiritual experience. We are spirits. We're having this temporary human experience. You are the one your ancestors were praying for and waiting for through the ages. You've been given a unique set of gifts, and you yourself are a gift to the world. When we start there, it's so much easier to really start leaning in. As we are coaching parents, working with their babies, there's a lot we can learn from the literature, even on something like an expeditionary learning model, that the teacher doesn't have to be the expert. The parent doesn't have to be the expert on everything in the curriculum. They can ask good, guiding questions and coach the quest for learning. It helps us with all the other things too. If you're terrified, like I see this happen in K-12 all the time, the teacher's like, oh, it's Columbus, it's in the curriculum, what am I gonna do? If I say this, the Italian folks are gonna get so mad at me. And if I say that, have you ever seen an angry native mom? What am I gonna do? As little as possible. But if that's what we do, we're building our educational response around our own racial comforts or lack of them, rather than what the kids actually need. Fostering the positive identity development of the kids who land before us. And it is a diverse world out there. I can see the diversity in the room and across this organization. It is different in different places. I live in rural northern Minnesota, and they have a different expectation and understanding. But it doesn't matter where you go on planet Earth. 30% of the population in Germany is born somewhere other than Germany. The diversity is everywhere. If the world becoming more diverse is the sinking of the Titanic, you hit that iceberg ages ago. Rearrange the furniture all you want. It doesn't matter Democrats or Republicans, building the wall, don't build the wall. This is who is here. The majority of the children in America are children of color, and we need to meet them where they're at. And we need to help all of our children of all groups and backgrounds be prepared for the world that's actually out there. We are more diverse than we've ever been. Interracial marriage is higher than it has ever been. And we are more segregated than we were before desegregation. Most Americans have a racially homogenous favorites list on their smartphone. So we need to prepare the kids how to navigate that diversity, to understand and respect one another, not fear their neighbors. Obviously, some people in our political universe don't understand that very well. And as we do that, you can think about the contributions that everyone has made to the world. Even just this list of foods Native people shared with the rest of the world. And it's not even a comprehensive list. I can pull it back up there for you. Whoops. Corn is in everything we eat, drink, and drive. Potatoes, staples of Russian and Irish cooking, came from Native people to the rest of the world. The tomato, imagine Italian food pre-tomato. I mean, it's in everything, right? Like the pizza, the lasagna, the spaghetti, and the Mediterranean diet. And you can just have a little kid look in their cupboard and do an inventory, and they're already learning all about diversity. Learning about diversity is not just learning about the rough things, although we do need to look at those things too. A minute or two on me, and I often start here, but I kind of wanted to cue us up a little differently today. There's home for me. That's northern Minnesota, Leech Lake. And I was adding to the introduction when I was speaking in Ojibwe. My native name is Waagoosh, that means fox. I come from the Eagle clan. In our tribe, we have a clan system where there are animals, birds, or fish. They double as a symbol for your family and a spiritual guide. And my family comes from Leech Lake. My relatives have been buried in the same place longer than America's been a country. I was thinking about, these are a couple folks in my family tree. And I always wondered how come I didn't get to learn about them when I was going to school. That I had to learn all about everybody else's chiefs. This guy, it's ironic, he got the name John Smith later in life. No connection to the one from Pocahontas mythology. By the way, what most Americans know about Pocahontas is mythology. It probably just comes from a Disney movie. If you want a very quick sidebar, there was somebody named Pocahontas. There was somebody named John Smith. They never had a romantic relationship. That was all embellished. Pocahontas was taken as a captive, was held for ransom. She was forced to marry a different Englishman named John Rolfe, had a son by him, was brought to England, paraded before the Queen, and dead by the age of 22. And most of what I just described, including her capture, ransom, forced marriage, and the birth of her son, all happened while she herself was a minor child. So we're supposed to be like dismantling the patriarchy and opposed to human trafficking. So dressing that one up as romance, very problematic. This John Smith was born in the late 1700s and died in 1922. He lived in parts of 3 different centuries. Incredible. He's not even the record holder for human longevity. There's so much to learn about. And I think for me, I didn't have a way to talk about this when I was a kid doing my first learning. But as I got older, it bothered me more that I could go to school for so many years to learn whatever I needed to be successful, and so little of it had anything to do with me. It wasn't mean people with racial animus so much as the absent narratives that were screaming at me. You and yours aren't important, aren't relevant, and do not matter. Because if we were important, relevant, or mattered, somebody would have said something in all my years of an education. Everything matters. How we frame it, how we talk about it. I like this Cornell West quote, "We are not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation with immigrants, with Indigenous people, and enslaved Africans in our origin." What a difference one little word makes. Instead of a nation of, a nation with. Obviously, it can be quite marginalizing to Native people to say we're a nation of immigrants, even if that statement is made with good intentions to say we're all human in it together. And it can be marginalizing to Black pain for those for whom they had ancestors that did not voluntarily choose to come here. By the way, you could apply that frame to any fault line in our society. America is also not a Christian nation. It is a nation with Christians, with Jews, with Sufis, with Muslims, with traditional Native Americans, with atheists and agnostics, all of whom are just as American as anybody else. It is the effort to say that we are collectively any one thing that will be inherently divisive and marginalizing. There's so much more to say and unpack. For our little kids, just remember, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb trees, it'll live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And we have some very limited expectations of what academic success and excellence look like, the skill sets that our little children should demonstrate. By the way, the skills in that colonial toolbox are good at certain things, but they are not good at everything. Colonization is taking one language, culture, and religion and using it to supplant all the others. It's about erasure, which, by the way, as a sidebar, for those steeped in the culture of erasure, one of the greatest fears is their own erasure. Enter American politics. And affecting the erasure through violence. Well, when you try to solve all your problems with violence, it makes a bunch of other problems. Now, why would we think that all of the problems created by the colonial way of solving problems could be solved by the colonial way of solving problems? They cannot. And bear in mind all of the oppressions. They injure everybody. Yes, there are some who may benefit in certain ways from some of the oppressions, but it dehumanizes everyone in equal measure and hurts everyone. And hurt people hurt people. So we all need healing. White folk need healing. So much healing. There's a reason why white men dominate the ranks of school shooters and serial killers. They need healing too. We all do. Briefly, Sometimes it surprises people. We all have layers. And by the way, when we speak to our own identities, we're not mathematical equations and fractions, we are layers. I don't just love the native part of my kids. I love all of them and all their layers. I don't just love their race or their gender or the whatever. It's all the things. So I'm kind of brown and usually braids or man bun today. But my father's not native at all. He was born in Vienna, Austria. He was an Austrian Jewish immigrant and survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. He got out of there at age 13, barely. He had 300 family members killed. Made it to America at 14, lied about his age at age 17, signed up for the US Army. World War II was still going. I think he wanted to kill Nazis, but they sent him to the Philippines instead. Eventually he came to Minnesota, met my mom, and here I am. So I love this layer of who I am. My mom has a very different story. Her mom, my grandma Luella, was taken away from her parents as a small child and sent to residential boarding school and forbidden to speak her language. She made it through the system, came back and married a local boy and started a family. Some parts of our culture were carried on in continuum and some things were not. My mom had an experience when she was a small child. Maroon vehicle drove up, 2 social workers got out, grabbed her, took her away and sent her to foster care. She had 2 uncles who followed the vehicle over 20 miles away. That night, they went and tapped on her window. Peggy, get out of there, come on. And they put her in the back of a station wagon and drove her back home to her folks. And the social workers never came back. Among other things, it demonstrates there was no service of papers. There was no service by publication. There was no court process or court hearing. They were literally baby snatching. 1/3 of Native American kids have been removed from their biological parents and placed into foster care or adoption. Most of them, 99% of them, with white families. So while going into foster care is tough and disruptive for any child of any group, these Native kids had the additional burden of being placed out of their language community, out of their culture community. There would be no visiting a sugar bush with placentas buried by the trees for them, even if the person trying to take care of them did so lovingly. There's much more to say about this practice. If you want to do a quick clinic, check out the podcast, This Land. Season 1 is about Native American sovereignty. Season 2 is all about the Indian Child Welfare Act. And it's a great little 10-episode clinic on some of the problems with the adoption industrial complex and child welfare practices. And it may be helpful to you in your work. Sometimes when you got 1,000 questions on your intake form, getting ready to do your home visiting, and some of the families are so worried about social services being weaponized to take their babies away, they are avoiding all the good stuff you have to offer. And you may be hampered and restricted because you've got 80 questions on your intake form, but there are ways to responsibly navigate that as an individual working in the system, and there are ways to evolve the system so that it does not hit those triggers so easily. But we certainly need to operate with sensitivity to this practice. My mom had a pretty amazing story. Okay, if I go 5? Okay. She had a pretty visceral experience with poverty. They'd pull all the kids from school 2 weeks at a time for hunting, fishing, wild rice harvesting, maple practice. That's 8 weeks already out of school every year. All the kids had to help put food on the table. There are 10,000 tribal members at Leech Lake. She lived on our reservation for 18 years in a row. She only met one professional Native person ever. One, her whole childhood. That one person was the school nurse. And she thought, maybe I could do that. So she went on to nursing school and came back to work for our tribe's health program. And then she thought, even here, Native people are getting pushed around, enough of that. She went back to school and got a law degree, became the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. When I was a kid, she'd bring me with her to school, and she'd say, you just sit there, don't say a word. And I would go into the courtroom with her when she brought me there. I would sit there and I would not say a word. Couldn't remember her court cases, but I really remember she was the only woman in court. She and her law partner, Paul Day, they were the only natives in court. And I just came walking out of there thinking, you know what? We can do stuff. It's the D in the DEI. Diversity, representation, and role models. It matters. By the way, what happens when you have the all-male gender equity team? It's ridiculous, right? You're missing some vital perspectives, and the optics aren't so good. The same is true with the all-white racial equity team, which is just as ridiculous, but doesn't always sound as ridiculous to some people. We had a pretty significant increase in the number of DEI positions after Derek Chauvin's murder of George Floyd. And about 50% of those positions were eliminated, and 76% of them are held by white folk. There are a lot of ways that the efforts get undermined. The Native experience is complex, and if all you know is that you know enough to know there's a lot of stuff you don't know, then you just gotta lean in and pay more attention to that. Read the books, do the podcast, check out the videos, do the things. This one's pretty telling though. In 1969, 57% of Native people were below the poverty line, and by 2020 it had dropped to 23%. Tells you two things. One is 23% of a population below the poverty line is gross. That's unacceptable. That's an indictment on America and its oppressions, not Native people and their lack of a work ethic. But the other thing it tells you is that we just shaved 34 entire percentage points off of Indigenous poverty. That's not a government intervention. That's something Native people did for themselves. If you want to learn about how to disrupt systemic intergenerational poverty, ask Native people. They have the best track record for doing exactly that. And it's important to note because oftentimes we are deeply enculturated and conditioned to paternalism and pity. Oh, those poor people. If I can just get these offerings to them, it's going to help them so much. But I don't know how many of you have approached a marriage or a friendship with paternalism and pity and had it get you very far, as opposed to partnership. When you see this, it can position you to understand, oh my God, I have things I need to learn. How do they do that? How can we scale that up? How can we do this in other places? What do I need to know? In addition to, here's what I do know and how I want to share it. I like the Abigail Echo Hawk quote, "We are not a historically underserved population. My history is one of ancestors who survived so I could thrive. My history didn't start with Western civilization. I am colonially underserved. I am institutionally underserved, and I am historically resilient." All right. There's my crew. It's a little dated. I'll leave you with two very quick stories, and then I'm going to wrap this up. Be super quick. I told him I wouldn't wreck the agenda. And so this is one of my sons. So I mentioned that we have 9 children, 6 biological and 3 were foster kids. The foster kids actually started out as stepkids, and my ex-wife had a terrible descent into the darkness, the kind that we all face in our professional work, and all of us get impacted by in our personal lives. She got into drugs. Against all odds, she is still alive, but she's been actively using for over 20 years. I live in a beautiful house, and I'm surrounded by kids and grandkids, and she is literally homeless. We've tried everything. And this kid was an infant in arms when she fell. The number one job as a parent is do not mess your kid up. You got no do-overs. And so many things to go wrong. And so here I really relied on the culture stuff. I knew that trauma is not a death sentence. My dad was a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. My grandma went to residential boarding schools. My mom had these tough childhood experiences with poverty and social services, and I'm doing okay. The good stuff gets passed forward too, and with healthy and intentional healing, we can overcome anything. I knew that, but I also knew what the data said, that our sense of normal gets formed when we're very young. He has no memory of ever being held by his mom. He is the recipient of the kind of blessings and curses that only a father can bestow. And so we have a ceremony where we call it a bear smoke, build a miniature wigwam, put offerings in there for every member of the family. And it seemed to reassure him. He'd go running around in the woods and stop and look at it and put a smile on his face. We had another one where we blessed a little feather and hung it on the southwest corner of the house. And I said, this will keep us safe even when it's storming outside. Sometimes it would start storming. He'd run outside, do a lap around the house. And I'd be like, what are you doing, kid? And he'd say, well, I'm just checking on the feather. But it seemed to reassure him. I could share lots of stories about all the wild kid antics, because I was at one point at quite a few, 7 children, single parenting the mob. And I remember one time, I would take the kids to the buffet, and I'd say, just put us in the far back, as far away from normal people as possible, because, you know, and they'd still go to the front, use the bathroom, and run through the restaurant going, I took a crap. And I was like, I don't know them. And trying to get this kid out of the buffet, and at one time he couldn't get his coat on because he had bunched up fists. I said, okay, baby, what's in your hands? I got the mac and cheese. And he's like trying to smuggle 2 cents worth of mac out of the buffet, which on the one hand was like hilarious and cute. And then I'm also thinking like, oh no. Does this mean like his mom can be taken so anything can be taken? Now he's gonna have food anxieties and be hiding a candy bar between the mattresses and he turned out okay. He actually became a very outgoing kid, got into music, show choir, kind of like Glee Club. I had to watch every single episode of Glee with all the kids, which is a bit of a lift for me. I'd much rather just watch the music sets, but, skip all the drama. But I was teasing this kid. He was about 9th grade when he was going into that. And I said, it's going to be just like that show, what you're doing. Everybody who's dating, they're all going to switch by the end of the school year. A lot of drama in between. I said, there's going to be a lot of crying. There's going to be a lot of hugging. There's going to be a big trophy. It's going to be awesome. He said, shut up, Dad. You don't know. It won't be like that. I was like, okay. And I had to miss an out-of-town meet, so I said, all right, you call me. It doesn't matter what time. So I get the, midnight phone call, which I wish I could have recorded. It started with, Dad, I love you. I'm like, I love you too, son. How's it going? Because I got like a dozen spontaneous I love yous from a teenage boy, right? I love you, Dad. Dad, everybody's crying. I love you. They're all hugging each other. It's a big trophy. I was like, I told you. And then, we had the pandemic and, show choir is canceled. Prom is canceled. Life is canceled. Blah. And all kids have to break from their parents. At some point, they do. It's healthy. You can't helicopter a kid forever. They have to do life on their own too. And they need support. And finding the right balance is always a trick. And I'd tell all my kids, I said, there are 1,000 definitions of success. You do not have to come up with anything that I come up with, but you do have to come up with something. What's it gonna be? So I was pushing him, and finally he said, okay, college. I was like, whew, yes. What are you thinking? He said, well, I was looking at all these colleges and universities, and Dartmouth, that's got some good Native programs. Of all the Ivy Leagues, it's really the only one. That's what I want. Part of me is thinking like 7% of the people who apply to that school get in, but my job is not to close doors, my job is to support. And so he started working on his applications and the essays, which was really a powerful experience. He wrote about our family, my dad and his experience, my grandma and her experience, wrote about his mom, times when he was mad or sad, times when he couldn't feel anything except upset that he couldn't feel anything. And then he said some really profound things from a teenage boy. He said, we are more than the sum of our tragedies. And all this trauma, it stops with me. Took us a while, and then we got this.
Let's go! I'm so happy for you. Oh, my boy. Oh, I miss you. Let's go! Come here, Evan!
That was about a lot more than a kid getting into the college of his dreams. I think I was terrified. Would what happened with his mom trip him up? Would he deny himself opportunity for the sake of familiarity? Would he self-sabotage on his way out the door? Would he run away from everyone and everything? And people sometimes said things like, you saved those kids, you pulled them out of the darkness, and it never felt quite right. If anything, it was very much the other way around. Every time that kid was running around in the woods looking at that little miniature wigwam or the feather on the corner of the house, putting a smile on his face and singing through adversity, he was reinstilling my faith in our own cultural toolbox, in the decency of human beings, in our resiliency, in our ability to overcome even the toughest things. That the seeds get planted at the earliest age, and how important those strivings are. My mom would get asked, how'd you do it with her crew? And she'd say, I believe in education, but not just from books. I believe in family. I got my kids out in the woods. I made sure their placentas went there. I made sure that they knew what to do when their kids were born too. Nothing can stop a Native person who knows who they are. I like that Margaret Mead quote, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I'm in a room full of those thoughtful, committed citizens. Remember not to approach the work with paternalism and pity, but with partnership. If you've come to help me, you're wasting your time, but if you've come because your liberation is tied up with mine, then let us work together. It's a view of our family property, which did not look like this. It looked like this when my parents got started, and they started planting trees until they planted all of the trees in that picture, over 1 million of them, and it transformed the whole landscape and the ecosystem. A lot of us look around at all the problems in the world. How are we going to create a bright future for these little kids? How are we going to navigate climate change, race relations, politics, and all of it? And sometimes we retreat and think, there's not much I can do about that. I'll try to be a decent human, and I'll tell my kids to be decent humans, but it's not like we need to take this mountain of problems humans have been making for thousands of years and move it right now It's more like we need to keep planting the seeds, and it can change everything. That's the work. That's the work you are doing. That's the work this conference is about. Thank you so much for all your efforts and strivings. I believe in it. I believe in you, and I hope you have a great conference. Thank you so much.